As your MSP grows, your role as an owner is going to change more than just about anybody else's. From doing kind of all of the things in the early days to eventually kind of handing off lots of the day-to-day stuff, your role can be quite a journey. The challenge is knowing when you can hire people, who you should hire, what to do, how to step out of things. All of those things are really challenging things to figure out as you go, and that's what we're going to talk about today. My name is Adam Hammond. Welcome to Ramblings of a Geek. I've been in the MSP space for the better part of a couple decades. I've seen a lot of transitions throughout my tenure. Most recently, I actually spent a lot of time extracting different departments out from underneath ownership group that really needed to kind of step away from a lot of the day-to-day. And I've learned a lot along the way. I've seen a lot from other folks, and that's what we're talking about today, is that kind of the evolution of the owner's role within your MSP. As a business owner, you have the unique opportunity to shed all of these roles that don't bring you enjoyment. But the problem is you can't shed them all at once. You can't just hire a bunch of different resources and just be done with all of the stuff you don't want to do. And in the book, Buy Back Your Time, the author talks a lot about this concept, and it really is apt for most MSP business owners because you get stuck along the way and you can really burn out. And so the point of all of this is to figure out a sane way of kind of getting out of some of the stuff that just doesn't bring you enjoyment. Now, like I said before, you can't just shed all of the things at once. Sometimes you have to do the thing, as a mentor of mine likes to say, because sometimes you just have to get in there and get the job done. Now, the reality is that as your company grows, you're going to be able to pick off things here and there that you want to get rid of. That's what I want to talk about in today's video. I'm talking a lot about how to hand things off, what you should hand off, and kind of how to make them not boomerang back to you, because that's a thing that can happen quite frequently as well. Over the past several months, I've had plenty of business owners talk about doing things that didn't make a lot of sense and certainly weren't going to bring them a lot of joy. Things like picking up and doing a bunch of cold calling, or facilitating direct mail campaigns, or rebuilding their website when they had no skills in web development, or grinding away at level 1 work. And those things really weren't going to bring them any joy, and they're going to be grinding themselves down. While you can do some of this stuff, I don't know that you should, right? This is where understanding what the best use of your time really is important, where understanding that doing this task is really going to yield a lot of results and this one isn't. And so maybe you don't do this one, you do this one instead, right? So if you think about that cold calling example where the business owner is like, I'm going to bring a bunch of brand new business in because I'm going to do some cold calling. Well, a couple of things come to mind with that. The first thing is that business owner had never cold called a day in their life. And cold calling is a skill. You have to learn it and develop it over time. So you're not going to become magically good at it because you just decided you're going to do it, right? So the first thing is you need to understand that if you don't already have that skill built in, it's going to take some reps to get there. And if that's not a thing that you want to do long-term or should be doing long-term, I'm not sure that's a task you should be doing. The second thing is if you don't make good progress on it pretty quickly, it can be kind of demotivating to continue to do. And I think it's really important that you don't just grind yourself down. That's what creates the burnout in our business. That's what creates the burnout in any business is grinding away at tasks that just are not well suited for you. So this is where understanding what you're good at and where your strengths lie is really important. When I ran my initial consultancy way back decades ago, I was awful at invoicing. I was awful at most things finance. And I would routinely not bill on a regular basis. I was too nice. I'd give away time. I would do all of these things because I wasn't good at it and procrastinated the heck out of it. And it just was a bad situation for me and my business, right? That's what I'm talking about. A lot of this stuff that you can hand off, especially in the early days, is relatively easy tasks. But over time, in order for you to grow your business, you need to kind of get out of the way anyway. And I think if I would have gotten out of the way of the invoicing and handed it off to somebody else, my business would have been a whole lot more successful, especially early in those early days. So let's talk about why handing things off is so important, because yes, you don't want to do a bunch of stuff you don't really want to do, but there's a bigger meaning to all of this, and there's a bigger reason why this is important. So the first part is you can't do all the things. You can't just handle all of the things forever, right? At some point, you need to take a vacation. Some point, you're going to get sick. Some point, you just need to take some time away from the business. You, as a business owner, can really become a bottleneck for your business where you can't move, you can't grow any bigger, right? So most MSP business owners are certainly service-related company business owners can grow the company fairly large on their own with minimal help. That's a thing that we're able to do. But the challenge is you get to a natural ceiling. And usually in the MSP space, even if you've hired a couple techs, if you're going to do all of the other stuff, right, you're going to hire a couple techs and you're going to just do everything else yourself, you're going to find a cap at about $1.5 million in revenue. You're just not going to get a whole lot bigger than that. Sure, there's some exceptions to the rule, but you are limited to the amount of time you are willing or able to work in a day, and the amount of effort you're willing to put in on all of the things. So that's what I talk to a lot of MSPs about, is trying to understand that they need to step out of all of the things over time. And that's what we're going to talk a lot about today, is kind of like the things you can step away from and how to do it, and to make it not come bouncing right back to you, right? So the overall why of why you hand things off is really twofold. One, it helps prevent burnout for you as a business owner, because there's a lot of that stuff going on. But two, it helps raise up that natural ceiling from $1.5 million to 2 and 3 and 4 and 5 million and above and beyond. If you're able to hand these things off well and do that the right way, you're going to be in so much better spot. As a business owner, it's up to you to figure out how you want to grow. So how do you want to proceed? What do you want to hand off? And that's what we're talking about next, is what you can hand off in some of those pieces. Who do you hire? When do you hire? Like, what roles do you hire for? Those kind of things are really important, because that all plays a big part of like what you're going to hand off and when you're going to hand things off. A lot of times in the early days, owners think that they need to hire full-time employees and they need to bring a bunch of people on, and that's not really the case. In fact, I think it's a really good practice to think about bringing either part-time resources on or outsourcing pieces of your business. Lots of different things could be outsourced. Bookkeeping is a really great example where you can offload all that bookkeeping stuff. And frankly, it would have served me well back when I was trying to start my business a bunch of years ago, of just handing off all of that QuickBooks and the bookkeeping and the invoicing stuff. Would have made my life a lot easier. So think about that. Think about some of those relatively simple things you can hand off, but also think about maybe like part-time techs, right? Not every tech wants to work full-time. They have reasons why maybe they only want to work 15 or 20 hours a week, which would be a benefit to you and a benefit to them, right? Those are some good options. But there's also opportunities for you to do things like outsourcing your help desk, or hiring a part-time consultant here and there, a 1099 contractor that can help you on a case-by-case basis, right? There's a number of different options you can do in the early days to kind of get someone to help you without having a full-time employee, without all of those full-time needs and resources and those kinds of things. One thing that has become clear to me with all of this is it is often easier to hand off the simpler tasks, the things that are a little bit just easier to describe, and or that there's a whole other industry kind of built around it, which is why bookkeeping is a really good example to hand that off. But then you think about hiring some techs and those kinds of things, and oftentimes a business owner is going to do one of two things when they hire some of the early techs. They're going to hire someone to take on the level 1 stuff because they just want to get rid of that, especially if they have a lot of it. Or they're going to hire somebody that's more qualified, like level 2, level 3 engineer, where they just basically hire the person and say, here's a big pile of tickets, go to town, right? That's a pretty typical in either direction. But the idea is that some of this simpler stuff are some of the first roles you're going to hire for, some of the first roles you're going to outsource, and those kinds of things, because frankly, it's just easier to hand some of that stuff off in that direction. So all that said, with kind of handing off the simpler stuff, there's kind of a path that many MSPs take. Now, obviously, there's going to be exceptions to the rule here, but for the most part, I see the path kind of going like this. So the MSP business owner starts their MSP, starts growing it up a little bit. They hire a tech or two. They bring on an outsourced bookkeeper, or they offload it to their spouse or somebody that does it sort of on the side for them for a little bit anyway. And they grow their business a little bit bigger, and they get 4, 5, 6 techs in. And at some point, somewhere in here, the logical thing to do is to hire a service manager, somebody to kind of keep the techs in line, keep them working on the right things, do one-on-ones and those kinds of things, because it's important to kind of hand some of those things off. And that's one of the first big kind of handing of big tasks off to somebody else. And this is one of the more important ones, because having a good service manager when you're ready for it is really vital to your organization. So you hire this service manager and they handle the day-to-day stuff, right? They're rocking and rolling, they're doing the thing. And at some point here, probably in the similar area, as you're looking to hand off projects, you may be handed to the service manager, maybe you have a project engineer or something like that you can kind of hand the projects off. But really, you're really trying to extract yourself from the day-to-day technical stuff as much as you possibly can, and projects is kind of one of those next things to go. So then, as a business owner, you're left with a handful of kind of bigger pieces, right? You're the strategic direction of the company. You're doing kind of the COO kind of operations side of the world, kind of keeping an eye on all things business. You're keeping an eye on finance. you are, sales and marketing person and account manager, right? So you still have kind of 5 big roles left. So the next one I think you want to hand off at this point is account management. And this one is a thing that you're probably inherently pretty good at, because most MSP business owners are pretty solid at account management. And the reality is that this is kind of the next sort of easiest thing to hand off. You hire someone who can take over most of that account management stuff. They build some processes around these pieces, and they're off and running and doing their thing. Also, somewhere around here, and maybe before or after account managers, you hire a more robust finance person, right? At some point now, you've got 10 or 15 employees potentially, and it's really time for you to not do all the things finance for your company. Even if you're a financial person, that is a thing that somebody needs to spend their day job on. And maybe it's an outsourced controller, maybe they're working for you, part-time, but it's more than a bookkeeper at this point. So you're looking at someone to kind of really manage the finances of your organization, because it's really important. In fact, I would suggest that as early as you possibly can, you get good enough at your finances. I'll actually link a playlist above that talks all about business finance for MSP business owners, because I think it's really important. But you hand off finance, you hand off account management, and now you're down to sort of sales and marketing and kind of like running the business side of the world. So at this point, I think it's time for you to bring in someone to help you with the sales side of the world. But I'm not talking about necessarily a full-time sales closer. Now, you certainly could, if you find that person, for sure go after it. But I think this is an opportunity for you to bring on someone to help with, things like cold calling, or basically like a lot of the top of the funnel stuff, right? The folks who can go out there and get you leads, and then you as the business owner still kind of go out and you close the deals and you work your way through those things. But you're no longer the only person responsible for top of lead type of activities. As an owner, you're going to probably be involved in sales and doing things like networking and those kind of things for quite a while yet. So that's not a thing you're going to hand off here, but this top of funnel person really can kind of help kind of build up the lead engine that kind of runs behind you as the kind of the chief salesperson still in your business. So now that you've started to hand off some of the sales stuff, there's a couple different paths I think you can take as the owner. And it really depends on kind of what you want to do in the business. The first path is to hire a sales closer, someone to kind of run the sales side of the world for real, and then you spend your time on kind of that COO, CEO kind of work and really focus over there. Or you hire somebody that is essentially your COO, your integrator, if you're using the EOS terminology, and you focus more on the CEO visionary and the sales closing, right? There's sort of 2 different paths you could take. And I think it's important to think about which direction you really want to take and what's going to be the best use of your time. Many MSP business owners are excellent closers, and not because they're really good salespeople. It's because they're owners and they're working with other owners of other businesses, and it's just easier for them to close a deal. And they don't even have to be slick or anything. You can be real. You're the business owner. You can make decisions that other people can't make. So that's a pretty valid way of going about it. But there's a fair number of MSP business owners that really hate sales. They just think it's the worst thing in the world, and they want to get rid of that as quickly as possible. So I could see either path. And really, either path is fine, because ultimately you're going to take both paths, right? Because at some point, as the business owner, your role becomes entirely face of the company, CEO, kind of being the top level person, top level manager. You're setting the vision for the company, and you've now left most of the rest of the company to other people to manage, and that's a really important thing to do. Now, the challenge with this is you're gonna kind of want to get your hands back in on things, and I'm going to tell you probably shouldn't. We'll talk a little bit more about that in a minute. But the thing here is you need to be able to step back and put that forward-thinking strategic hat on, and that's really hard to do early on when you're doing all of the things, right? But this is the opportunity to do that as basically your full-time job, which frankly could be really awesome especially if it's something you want to get better at. Then from there, depending on how you want to do things and how much you want to flex your entrepreneurial muscle with other things, you might actually hire a CEO, someone to kind of run the company, and you step back as you're the chairperson of the board, and you're doing the very, very top level stuff, and you're mostly like disconnected from the day to day, and maybe you go focus on doing something else, building another business, traveling the world, for whatever makes sense for you. But you've now kind of extracted yourself out of all of the day-to-day stuff, and the business runs on its own, which is really a great place to be. And you could potentially insert yourself back as let's say you loved being a CTO or something at that point. You could potentially insert yourself back in there as long as you're not making weird owner waves with things. But there you have some options once you've kind of completely extracted yourself from the day-to-day of things. Now, like I said before, this isn't exactly a prescription for you and your business. In fact, many businesses will take a different direction and do things in different orders. That's all fine. But the idea is that there are some of these key things that you're going to want to hand off as you go. And I think that's kind of what we're talking about here. And the next section is, how do we hand stuff off, right? Because that's a really hard thing to do, because things can boomerang back if they're not done to your satisfaction or not done well at all, those kinds of things. In the early days of some of those initial hires, you are very likely going to find that it's a sort of a disjointed thing. You're not really ready to hire somebody with all of your documentation, those kinds of things. And really, that's okay. In fact, that's completely normal. What typically happens is you hire somebody and they come on board and you kind of are figuring it out as you go a little bit, and they ask you a ton of questions for a few months. That's totally normal, and I really wouldn't get too worried about it. In fact, if someone's asking you a ton of questions early on, that's probably not so much a them issue. It's probably more of a you and communication issue. And really, this is kind of the harder part of all of this, because as you get better at it and as you kind of elevate the different things you do, and as you kind of work your way down the path that I just kind of laid out in the previous section, is you typically end up starting to hire more and more senior people, which require a little bit less kind of hand holding as you go. The key with this handing off of all of the things process is clearly communicating what the expectations of whatever the role happens to be, especially if it's the first time you're kind of creating that role. The biggest challenge for you as a business owner and the people that you hire is mismatched expectations. If you think that you've explained something well enough, I'm probably going to say you haven't. Unless you go to that person and try to explain to them what they're doing, and they're like, yeah, I know, here are all the different pieces that you care about. Like, that's a really important piece. But here's the thing, is that there's a difference between explaining this and communicating this well and micromanaging. You don't want to micromanage people because nobody likes it and you're going to hate it as a business owner. But it's not micromanaging to say, here are my expectations for this role. Here are the things that are really important to me and really important to my clients that you hit. And let's build a process to make all these things happen. And then you give that person some time to breathe and some time to kind of figure out these processes. And the reality with hiring anything out, and frankly, as you move down the path, you're going to find that people aren't going to do things the way that you would probably do them. And that needs to be okay. 80% quality compared to what you do is going to be plenty good enough for most things. Now, it's not always going to be good enough, but for the most part, it's going to be good enough. And frankly, the people that you bring on board are going to be able to hit 80% without too much trouble for the most part, and probably 90 or 95% after just a little bit of time. And you need to understand what's good enough for you, what's good enough for your clients, and what's good enough for your employees without really kind of frustrating any of the major constituencies here. Now, it's really easy as a business owner to say, well, they should just act like owners and they should behave like I want them to behave. But that's just not how things work. People who aren't business owners, they don't have the same stake in your business, they don't have the skin in the game that you do, aren't able to exactly act like business owners, and certainly aren't going to care as much as you do. That's just a simple fact. What you can do is set good expectations, help them along the way with understanding why those expectations are important to you, and do your best to continually give them feedback that's actionable and that makes sense to them and that helps move all the things forward. One of the more challenging things that I've done in the MSP space was to extract a number of the different departments I talked about away from the ownership group that really needed to hand things off. The problem with all of those pieces, and every time I kind of picked on a new department, was that the expectations were routinely not super clear, which was fine. We figured it out. But the challenge for both me and the owner, because I had multiple owners in the company, one of the challenges for the 2 or 3 or 4 of us, depending on what was going on, was to be on the same page. And that is really an opportunity for you and whoever is going to take things from you, for you to have a really solid conversation and really clear expectations. And if you don't have clear expectations at the beginning and you understand that they're not clear, then it becomes a really good opportunity for you and that person to have continuing conversations to continually level up what you're working on in those kinds of pieces. It's really important to kind of morph that along as you go, because you're not going to get it right on the first try. Almost certainly not going to get it right on the first try. And it's really important that that you set the expectations around like what the client experience is going to be like, the communication back and forth between you and the person taking things over, the communication to the clients, all the different things, all of those different pieces are really good things to talk about. And the more you can be on the same page as early as possible in this process, the less likely you're going to feel the need to like pull things back towards you, because again, you don't want these things boomeranging if you can avoid it. Ultimately, you may find that this is a 2 steps forward, 1 step back kind of process, and that's going to feel frustrating. But you also need to understand that this is perfectly normal and probably just fine. The reality is, as long as you're making deliberate progress towards whatever the end goal is, whether that's a eventual sale of your company or just projected growth or whatever that looks like for you, as long as you're making deliberate steps towards that, you're probably doing the right thing. So give yourself a little bit of a break, give your team a little bit of a break, and understand that this is a continuum, that as long as we're moving towards that, whatever the end goal is, we're all going to be in a much better spot. Having a plan and creating a path to hand things off and executing on that plan and walking that path is a great way to unlock more and more growth in your business. That's why this is so important. This is not a topic that we're going to maybe solve in one video, so just know that we're going to come back to this over time. But in the meantime, you can watch this video up above to learn about kind of how to do one-on-ones with your team, especially if you've never done one-on-ones before. It's a really important thing to figure out. And up over here, I'm going to throw a link towards the video for the evolution of your service team growth, because I think there's a lot of good opportunity for kind of building the similar paths over there as well. Thanks for coming on this ramble with me, and I hope to see you on the next one.